Good evening. You're listening to the True Crime Witch podcast, the podcast that takes you into the world of everything murderous, mysterious, and downright macabre. I'm your host, Emma, and you're listening to episode 15, Lynn Sells. Warning, this episode contains graphic and sensitive information about rape, murder, and crimes against children. As always, your listening discretion is advised. Lynn Sells and his twin sister Tammy Jean were born on June 28, 1964 in Oakland, California. When the twins were just 18 months old, they contracted spinal meningitis, and unfortunately, Tammy Jean died. After the death of his twin, Tommy was sent to live with his Auntie Bonnie in Wapol in Holcomb, Missouri. Tommy would be reunited with his mother when he was just 5 years old, after she found out that his Auntie Bonnie had made plans to actually fully adopt him. From an early age, Tommy was pulled between different family members and never felt like he really belonged anywhere. Unfortunately, Tommy's life didn't get better from here on out, and when he was 8 years old, he was molested by Willis Clark, who actually did so with the permission of Tommy's own mother. It is also reported by Tommy that his mother left him to fend for himself. He never went to school, and by the tender young age of 7, he was drinking alcohol. He was travelling down a dark and destructive path pretty quickly, when, at 13 years old, he climbed into his grandma's bed completely naked. Tommy was known to drink, smoke, and abuse drugs. With all of this going on, his mother once again just completely abandoned him and left him to fend for himself. Now, according to Sells' own accounts, he committed his first murder at age just 16 when he broke into a house and killed a man who was molesting a young boy, much like the story of his childhood. So perhaps this crime, this murder never happened, or perhaps it did. Perhaps he reacted in rage to, the guy who was molesting the young boy because he knew the damage that it had done to himself, and obviously he didn't want another child to ever experience or go through the pain that he did. Or maybe it was a fantasy that he'd made up in his head to help ease the pain and to feel that vengeance and, just sort of justice, I guess. It could have been a fantasy that, he thought of killing his molester, which, I'd say is pretty normal for anyone who's been abused like that, especially as a child. So there is actually no official evidence to back this claim up, so that's why I mentioned it could be a fantasy, that he has to get revenge and get justice. But according to Lynn Sells, this happened, so I guess we have to rely on the testimony of a murderer, which, not a great source, not a great reliable witness, but we'll go with it. For a few years, Tommy drifted from place to place, picking up odd jobs wherever he could, just to make ends meet. He attempted to reunite with his family, who were now living in Little Rock, Arkansas. However, this family reunion was extremely short-lived when he tried to rape a family member. So, as we can see, Tommy's life is just spiralling and spinning out of control. I guess from the age of 5, his life was on a heavy downward slope, drinking alcohol at age 7, smoking, drinking, doing drugs. He got into his own grandma's bed completely naked. His life is fast, in this fast downward spiral, really. In what is becoming an extremely common pattern, Sells was left to fend for himself, in the only way that he knew how: crime. He floated around committing strings of murders and robberies whilst holding short-term, low-skilled jobs, such as working at a carnival. Working at the carnival along with hopping trains was perfect for Sells, as it meant that he didn't have to stay in one place for too long, meaning that it limited the chance that someone would get to know him or would recognise him. Tommy has one confirmed murder in Arkansas in 1983 from when he was travelling around. Hal Aikens is the only confirmed victim from this time frame. However, Tommy has actually confessed to murdering 2 people. Following the murders in Arkansas in 1983, Tommy travelled to St. Louis, Missouri. Later that year, in 1983, Tommy was arrested for car theft and given a 2-year sentence. He only served until February of 1984, when he was released early, even though afterwards he failed to keep his probation term. So not only is he sentenced to 2 years, sort of towards the end of 1983, so he serves a couple of months, and then he violated his parole terms. But I guess the Board of Corrections in Missouri didn't seem to give too much of a shit. Who knows? Shortly after he was released from prison in Missouri, he started working at another carnival/county fair where he met 35-year-old Ina Court and her 4-year-old son, Rory. Now, I'm going to go into detail about the murder of Ina Court and Rory Court, and obviously this crime contains information of violence against a child, and it's quite a graphic depiction of a crime, so, feel free to skip ahead, click away from the episode if you need to. I understand that these topics aren't for everyone, so just use your own discretion. According to Sells, he went back to Court's house where he caught her rummaging through his things. In a fit of rage and, quote, self-defense, he beat her to death with a baseball bat. He also killed 4-year-old Rory simply because he was a witness to the crime. Rory and Ina's bodies were discovered just 3 days later. However, Sells was long gone. There were no witnesses to the crime, and obviously in 1984, forensic testing just wasn't at the standard that we know today. Sells served a short time in prison, again in Missouri, for drunk driving and crashing his car. His sentence this time lasted from September 1984 until May 16th, 1986. Once released from prison, Tommy murdered a stranger in what he calls, quote, self-defense, again, despite there being no evidence to back up his claims. So it seems like he uses self-defense as a way of justifying murder, whether that's in a legal sense of the term, or whether it's in his own mind, if he thinks in his own mind, well, shit, it was self-defense, as, this person came at me, trying to attack me, trying to rob me, trying to murder me. It sort of rationalizes it in his brain. It makes him feel bad. It makes him feel less bad. Doesn't make him feel bad. It removes himself from the situation, like it detaches him from blame. So I guess it's his own rationalization is to keep on killing, and he's like, if people keep attacking me, if people keep trying to harm me, and I attack them back, then that's fine. I guess, you'll see it in different serial killers where, especially if it's a duo or whatever, they will detach themselves. They'll talk about themselves in the third person. It negates any blame or wrongdoing from them and removes them from the situation, but they can still talk about it. Tommy was up to no good once again when he headed to Aransas Pass, Texas, where he was hospitalized after an almost fatal heroin overdose. Shame that it wasn't fatal. In this podcast, I will never make fun of victims or the victims' families or anyone involved, but shithead serial killers and people who hurt others for no reason, well, yeah, I will always make fun of those shitheads, because guess what? They fucking deserve it. This didn't deter him though, and shortly after being released from the hospital, he stole a car and went on his merry way to Fremont, California. During his time in Fremont, California, it's suspected that Tommy is responsible for the death of 20-year-old Jennifer Dewey and 19-year-old Michelle Xavier. Dewey was shot to death and Xavier was found with her throat slit. Just a year later, in 1987, Sells murdered 20-year-old Stephanie Stroh. He drugged her with LSD before strangling her and tying weights to her body before throwing her body into a hot spring in Winnemucca, Nevada. This crime, again, has never been officially linked to Tommy, which you will see is a common theme. Now, I'm guessing because Stephanie Stroh was thrown into a hot spring, in terms of body and, other forensics, there's not going to be a whole lot, but there's going to be a crime scene. There's going to be 2 crime scenes, in fact, because that also counts as desecration of a corpse, I believe. And also you're going to have the forensics at the location that she was killed, and then, obviously, the forensics from his car or whatever transportation. So I do find it a bit strange that he wasn't officially linked, but again, I'm not a police officer. I'm just a forensic science and criminology graduate weighing in on the situation. Shortly after this horrific murder, Sells entered the home of the Dardeen family. He shot Keith Dardeen point blank in the head before cutting off and mutilating his penis. He then proceeded to bludgeon 3-year-old Peter to death with a hammer. Tommy Lynn Sells' final victims of the Dardeen family was Elaine, who was 7 months pregnant at the time of the attack. Again, warning, this is an extremely graphic and, quite frankly, fucking horrible crime. It's hard for me to read, it was hard for me to research, so again, discretion. If you need to fast forward, please do. Tommy raped Elaine and bludgeoned her in the head with a baseball bat. He attacked Elaine so hard that the shock forced her body into an early labour. In a sick and depraved move, Sells then proceeded to beat Elaine and the newborn to death. Once Elaine and the baby were dead, he inserted the bat into her vagina and tucked the pair into the bed before leaving. In 1990, Sells was sentenced to 16 months in prison for the theft of a truck. During this sentence, Sells was diagnosed with a, quote, personality disorder, end quote, which consisted of antisocial, borderline, and schizoid features, substance abuse disorder of opioids, cannabis, amphetamines, and alcohol, along with bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, and psychosis. So it's quite evident to see that Tommy did not have a good childhood, he didn't have a good upbringing, so I can understand where the psychiatrists and psychologists would have come with this recommendation. I can definitely see that, substance abuse disorder. So he does have a very long list of mental health issues. And as Marcus Parks from the last podcast on the left said, mental health is never your fault, but it is your responsibility. The end for Tommy Lynn Sells would come on December 31st, 1999, when Sells sexually assaulted, stabbed, and slit the throat of 13-year-old Kayleen Harris. He also slit the throat of 10-year-old Crystal Searles, who, by some miracle, amazingly managed to survive, and she went to get help at a neighbour's house. Searles not only managed to survive the savage attack, she managed to travel a quarter of a mile, to that said neighbour's house with a severed trachea, an injury that should have killed her within minutes, so she is an incredibly amazing and brave little girl. So, like I said, amazingly, Searles was able to work with police and to create a sketch, and she bravely gave an account of what happened that evening. Police were able to apprehend Sells within days of the sketch being made and issued. Police also suspected Tommy was confessing to more crimes than that he had committed. Horrifically, in the Tommy Lynn Sells case, the state attorney of Jefferson County, Illinois, refused to charge Sells with the quadruple murder of the Dardeen family in 1987 due to his confession. The state attorney stated that the details that Tommy had provided did not match the evidence that was found at the crime scene. Regarding the Dardeen murder, he also changed his story multiple times on how he had met the Dardeen family and the details of the case. Regardless of this, I still sort of believe that Tommy is guilty of the quadruple murder of the Dardeen family. It's just a disgustingly horrible and brutal crime, and I don't know why you would want to confess to such a horrible crime if you didn't do it. Most serial killers are actually quite ashamed of their crimes against children, so you'll see a common pattern that they will confess to butchering, murdering, cannibalizing, doing all sorts of disgusting mutilation to women, men, whoever their victims are. But then when it comes to crimes, mostly murder and sex crimes against children, they are absolutely just repulsed by themselves and they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to think about it. So I find it very strange that he would confess to something so fucking disgusting. Prosecutors in Illinois wanted Tommy to stand trial in order to clear up all of the confusion surrounding the murders that he had admitted to. However, under Texas law, death row inmates are not allowed to leave the state. Tommy Lynn Sells was charged with murder, rape, and attempted murder for the crimes that he committed in 1999. However, he has confessed to being responsible for over 70 murders, a claim which has never been confirmed. Police are, however, able to confirm that he is responsible for 22 murders. Tommy Lynn Sells was sent to death row in the Alan B. Polinsky Unit, Livingston, Texas, which belongs to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. He was officially received by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice in November of the year 2000. In 2004, Tommy Lynn Sells made a shocking confession when he told authorities that on October 13th, 1997, he broke into the home of 10-year-old Joel Kirkpatrick. He stole a butcher's knife from the kitchen before stabbing Joel to death and fighting with his mother, so Joel's mother, Julie Ray Harper. Sadly, Harper had actually been convicted of the murder of her 10-year-old son Joel back in 1997. However, now with the Tommy Lynn Sells confession and the advances in forensic techniques, she was finally acquitted and was able to heal after her release in 2006. Knowing that she was free and the monster responsible for her son's murder was finally seeing justice. Tommy admitted to crime writer Diane Fanning in a face-to-face interview that he had killed Joel after Harper was rude to him earlier that day in a convenience store. Tommy decided that he had to get revenge, so he followed her home and murdered her 10-year-old son. To me, that's just a completely inappropriate reaction. You know, if someone's rude to you, you'll probably tell them to, fuck off, or, something, maybe throw them a glance, or be like, you don't have to be so rude, or etc., etc. It just really speaks volumes to his mindset, his thought patterns, this obsession with revenge because a woman was rude to him. Really didn't like women, and especially did not like being snubbed by women, because that reminded him of his own mum, who didn't want him around, just left him to deal with his own shit at 7 years old and whatever. So it seems that Tommy Lynn Sells had some real mummy issues. On January 3rd, 2014, Tommy's execution date was set for April 3rd, 2014, by a Del Rio judge, with the death sentence to be carried out at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas. Tommy Lynn Sells declined to make a final statement before being given the lethal injection, which I find quite weird. This is a serial killer who loves to confess, loves the glory. He did prison interviews. I'm pretty sure there's a documentary that features him quite heavily, or he is the main subject of this documentary. If I find it, I will leave the name of it somewhere. But yeah, it seems like he loved the attention, the quote, glory, unquote. There's no glory about being a serial killer. But you know what I mean? Like, he loved to just show off and tell people, like, yeah, I did this, I did that. So it's very strange to me that he doesn't want some immortalised final words, you know, like how Richard Ramirez said, you know, death always came with the territory, see you in Disneyland. It's just strange. So maybe he was just not playing the game anymore. Maybe he finally realised the game was up for him, and who knows. At 6:27 p.m. on April 3rd, 2014, Tommy Lynn Sells was declared dead. Interestingly, and bravely, Crystal Searles, along with other victims' families, were present for his execution. Tommy Lynn Sells' confirmed victim count is 22, although by his own admission he is responsible for, quote, well over 70, end quote. And I've got a little list here just of a few crimes that Tommy Lynn Sells is suspected of. So he's suspected of the murder of Suzanne Corks, 27, who went missing from New York in May 1987. The murder of Melissa Tembley, who was 11 years old, on September 11th in 1988 in Lawrence, Massachusetts. He's suspected of the murder of a co-worker in Texas in 1989. Couldn't find any names, but it's just that he was a co-worker. He's suspected of the murder of Stephanie Meny, 13, in Springfield, Missouri, November 18th, 1994. The murder of Mary Beatrice Perez, 7 years old, in San Antonio, Texas, April 18th, 1999. And the sexual assault and murder of Haley McCone, 14, in Lexington, Kentucky, May 23rd, 1999. So, that is that, basically. Tommy Lynn Sells died as he lived, a piece of shit, on April 3rd, 2014. I'm not a believer in the death penalty, but I hope for Crystal and the other victims' families that they can start their healing and grieving process and can find something inside of them that will help ease the pain. But I can't imagine the pain that they feel every single day, and the pain that this monster caused them. And now he's dead. That's it. Wiped out. So, thank you for listening to episode 15. I appreciate this one. Was super heavy, super intense. Like, God, it was very hard to write, but it's even harder to say out loud. When you write it down, you're so just, you know, kind of in the zone of getting things together. And then when you sit and read and have to talk about these things, it's disgusting, and it does take a toll on you. So, my fellow true crime writers, podcasters, content creators, please remember to be kind to yourself, take a break, look after yourself, look after your mental health. It's important. And if you want to keep up with all my other shenanigans, you can find me on Twitter, just at True Crime Witch, Instagram, at True Crime Witch. I'm on Patreon, so if you would like early access to every single episode, plus some exclusive content that I've not quite figured out, you can just find me at www.patreon.com/truecrimewitchpod, and the next few people, so the next few patrons to sign up, will get a cool little badge with the podcast logo on. Claire, who's my best friend's mum, super kindly, like, I can't thank you enough, she made me some badges with the podcast logo on, so thank you, Claire, you're the best. I honestly can't thank you enough. Almost started crying when I got the present. It was so nice and so thoughtful. I'm on Tumblr if you want to get me there, just True Crime Witch Pod. I'm trying to think where else I am. You can listen to me on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker. You know, anywhere that you're listening to this now, you can find everything else. If you have any case suggestions, feel free to email them to me, just at truecrimewitch@outlook.com. Any feedback is always welcome. If you go onto my Twitter, there's a little feedback form that you can fill out. It really helps the podcast grow, reach new audiences, and I just like to improve. I like to learn and do new things. So until next time, folks, stay safe and stay spooky.